Standing Committee on Transport, Infrastructure and Communities. Before we begin the meeting, I want to remind all in-person participants to read the best practices guidelines and the cards on the table. These measures are in place to ensure the health and safety of all participants. Today's meeting is taking place in a hybrid format. Pursuant to Standing Order 1082 and the motion adopted by the committee on Friday, September 18th, 2023, the committee commences study on regulation of recreational boating on Canada's waterways. All witnesses have completed the required connection tests in advance of the meeting. I'd now like to welcome our witnesses, colleagues. From the Boating Ontario Association, we have Mr. Rick Lazell, Chief Executive Officer, joining us by video conference. On a de
And from Magog Conservation Inc., I hope I pronounced that right, Ariane Orjic by video conference, and from the municipality of Lac-Simon, we have a Chantal Crête, councillor, by video conference, Jocelyn Martel, once again, by video conference, and Benjamin Furtado, Director, Urban Planning Environment. We shall begin with the opening comments.
You have 5 minutes, sir.
Thank you very much to the chair and the committee for the opportunity to speak with you today. My name is Rick Lazell. I am the CEO of the Boating Ontario Association, a nonprofit association that has represented Ontario's recreational boating industry since 1967. Today, we serve the province's $4.5 billion boating community and represent some 520 member businesses. I'm also the president of the Canadian Marine Retailers Association, which is a collaboration of all 5 of Canada's marine trade associations, including Boating Atlantic, Nautisme Quebec, the Mid-Canada Marine and Power Sports Dealer Association, Boating BC, and of course, Boating Ontario. The Canadian Marine Retailers Association, or CMRA, collectively represents over 800 member companies in Canada's $9.2 billion boating community. We generate $4.6 billion in tax revenues for municipal, provincial, and federal governments, and recreational boating is a critical and important element in Canada's tourism industry. In countless markets across rural Canada, recreational boating is the very lifeblood of the community. We appreciate the opportunity to be here today and to contribute to the analysis and regulations pertaining to recreational boating on Canada's waterways. The health, viability, and growth of recreational boating in Canada, alongside our passion for healthy waterways, benefits thousands of Canadian families and communities. To that end, I would like to touch on several topics. Firstly is the industry's request to receive top-line retail sales data to guide and grow Canada's recreational boating sector. Industry data is used in all sectors to effectively guide small business owners on inventory needs, parts on hand requirements, service shop expansions, marketing strategies, and much more. As Canada's recipient of the data, Transport Canada plays a vital role in this growth strategy. The vessel registration process today requires industry and consumers to report sold and purchased boats to Transport Canada, and the data being collected represents the very data being requested by industry to move this forward. Secondly is the impact of aquatic invasive species and the industry's role. Few boaters would argue that clean and healthy waterways are paramount to our passion for fishing, water sports, and cruising. And those of us who make our living servicing these customers know full well the importance of clean waterways. In 2025, Boating Ontario will celebrate the 30th anniversary of our Clean Marine Environmental Best Practices program. To be accredited the right to fly the Clean Marine flag, members must successfully pass an in-depth, in-person audit every 3rd season. The Clean Marine audit includes analysis on many environmental best practices, including a commitment to waterways conservation. And flare recycling. Transport Canada mandates boaters to carry a select number of flares on board their vessels. These pyrotechnic devices expire after a select period of time, and for many years, Transport Canada funded a flare recovery collection program with the Canadian Power Squadron. This program was suddenly halted in 2024, and since then, thousands of expired flares are now found beside or inside marina waste bins or left on board customers' vessels. And finally is the issue of mandatory PFD or life jacket wear, an issue that Transport Canada is currently consulting on. Transport Canada's recently released survey on mandatory PFD wear through Let's Talk Transportation guides respondents to replies that are only in favor of mandatory wear. And to that end, we have pulled together and submitted our own written comments. While our industry stands prepared to immediately support mandatory wear in select circumstances, we require to make a more meaningful evidence-based decisions. With that in mind, we would support the implementation of a 3-year national law enforcement survey inclusive of all marine enforcement agencies to gather comprehensive data on the size and type of watercraft involved in safety incidents. This survey will provide critical insights into the relationship between vessel size and safety outcomes, enabling policymakers to make informed, evidence-based decisions regarding potential extension of mandatory PFD wear requirements to different size vessels. As representatives of Ontario and Canada's recreational boating sector, and as a key stakeholder for the interests of boaters everywhere, we appreciate this opportunity to be here today. Boating Ontario and the Canadian Marine Retailers Association are committed to advocating for policies that grow the sector, that manage the health of our waterways while protecting the rights of boaters across Canada. Thank you very much again for this opportunity. I do look forward to receiving your questions and comments.
Your timing was perfect. You were at 5 minutes on the nose. We appreciate that here. Thank you.
Thank you.
Now over to Ms. Orgic. Over to you for 5 minutes, please. Hello, my name is Ariane Orgic. I'm a biologist and executive director of Memphremagog Conservation, also known as MCI, a non-profit organization whose mission is to protect Lake Memphremagog since 1967. Lake Memphremagog is the largest body of water in the Eastern Townships and a drinking water reservoir for over 175,000 people, including the cities of Sherbrooke and Magog. As such, the quality of its water is an important public health issue for the region. The lake is 44 kilometers long. 3/4 of the lake is in Canada, while 25% is in Vermont. On the Canadian side, the lake is surrounded by 6 municipalities and has over 2,000 lakeside residences. The lake is a major tourist attraction for swimming, fishing, and pleasure boating. In 2010, 4,137 permanent boats were counted on the Canadian side alone. In 2021, 5,203 permanent boats were counted, representing an increase of over 1,000 boats, or more than 25% in only 11 years. The types of crafts that have increased the most are lightweight paddle boards, kayaks, as well as motorized personal watercraft and wake boats, which are used to practice sports that generate oversized waves. A survey completed by 643 users of Lake Memphremagog in 2021 revealed that waves inconveniencing other users as well as safety are major issues that can be explained, explain the increasing number of light crafts having to cohabit with a growing number of crafts generating oversized waves. The environmental impact of oversized waves is well known and scientifically documented. A study of the Université du Québec à Montréal shows that oversized wave-generating sports played within 300 meters of the shore cause bank erosion. A study by Université Laval shows that sports practiced at depths of less than 7 meters resuspend bottom sediments. In some lakes of Lake Memphremagog, boat waves reduce water transparency, increase nutrient concentrations, and encourage the growth of cyanobacteria blooms, which can be dangerous to human health. Over the past few years, Lake Memphremagog has been experiencing a major bloom of harmful algae, a problem that was the topic of a study by the International Joint Commission in 2020. We often cite the example of Fish Bay, an area renowned for its concentration of waterfowl, water birds, spawning grounds for several species of fish and habitat for brittle shiner, species at risk designated by the Government of Canada. There are 17 shoreline owners with wake boats out of a total of over 100. Fish Bay has an average depth of 3.1 miles and a maximum depth of 5.8 miles. Water quality is a cause for concern, and harmful algae blooms are frequent. The practice of sports generating oversized waves in this area raises significant challenges. For this reason, in 2016, the Memphramagog MRC set up a committee to analyze the possibility of restricting certain navigation practices in certain problem areas. Since one step in the procedure prescribed by Transport Canada was to try alternative solutions rather than imposing restrictions, an awareness raising campaign was put in place. After 8 years of efforts, there are still boaters making waves close to the shore and in shallow areas. Awareness raising requires significant financial and human resources, relies on the goodwill of boaters, and must be constantly repeated in order to educate new visitors. Even in the event of major safety and environmental problems, municipalities wishing to remedy the situation through regulations have no other choice but to follow a cumbersome and time-consuming procedure prescribed by Transport Canada for each of their water bodies. Considering that the well-documented environmental impact of oversized waves, Vermont decided to regulate wake boats on all their water bodies. To protect Canada's lakes, MCI believes that it is essential that the federal government establish national standards for all Canadian lakes based on scientific data, that it simplifies or streamlines the restriction procedure required of local authorities. Thank you for your kind attention. Thank you, Ms. Archik. And then over to Ms. Crate. Ms. Crate, over to you for your opening statement. Ms. Crate, your mic is switched off. Thank you very much. We are three from the Lake Simon municipality, and we had asked our urban planner to speak for us, so I'll turn it over to Mr. Benjamin Furtado. Over to you, Mr. Furtado. Hello. Since I didn't know the format that that it was going to take, if speaking after Ms. Orjic, we all agree with the statements. I'll start with what we gave as testimony. The Lac Simon municipality is comprised of several waterways, including Lac Simon, Lac Barrière, and this is a small municipality in the Outaouais area. We have public waterways, and also we have a boat area. In the neighboring municipality, we have restricted access with private community accessing our waters, which for now reduces the amounts of harms to these waterways compared to what was mentioned by Ms. Orjic. One of these waterways is equally accessible through our main waterway, Lake Barrière. So you can access the main waterway one way or the other. Some areas with significant depths and sensitive biodiversity, and when the boats navigate those areas, it causes some sediments to resurface. This is for our main waterway, but we have other challenges as a result of boats navigating this area. So some of the issues we face, first of all, you have attitudes of boat users, and also depending on the types of boats, we have issues of pollution and water waste from people who consume certain items and throw away the packaging in the water. And sometimes people even attend to nature's call in the waterways, and sometimes it's tough to sanction or legislate or even regulate some of these behaviors. So you understand that there's equally a field of competence, a scope of influence is limited. And in the same vein, we have motorized water boats that equally affect the quality of water. And we also have a challenge specifically in Wexer and other areas where boating activities lead to erosion. And it took several years, as Ms. Orjic explained, to educate people. This is quite a costly initiative, which is quite strenuous, but we tried to implement as much as possible. And then we apply the regulations, but we can't go further because we are in a municipal environment and we cannot seek further powers in order to enforce these rules. So even when we limit the speed to 7 kilometers an hour on these waterways, it is only within 300 meters from the banks, and people do not respect this, and this leads to significant erosion. So 70 kilometers is quite a high speed navigating on water. So we took stock of what's happening, and we what we realized is that there's problems in terms of federal jurisdiction and municipal jurisdiction. Currently, the federal legislation does not allow for significant or sufficient protection on these waterways. It doesn't allow us to limit the number of boats on those waterways. For instance, there could be 500 boats in a specific area, and we have no control over that. We equally don't have any control on the types of boats, like there's the wake surfs that are currently en vogue, and we cannot, normally we shouldn't allow certain types of boats because they generate high waves and dangerous waves. And also we have a phenomenon, and I consulted with other municipalities, aviation. We realize that there's equally challenges checking what's happening in terms of aviation. We can control pollutants and aquatic species, invasive species on those boats, but it's much more tricky when it comes to people with other watercrafts, and there are certain regulations which you cannot circumvent. And we realize that there's equally lack of accountability in terms of responsibilities, the shared responsibility towards the environment and navigation between the provincial jurisdiction and federal jurisdiction. So I don't know if we can call it an inconsistency, but it's difficult to combine both powers to ensure that navigation rules are respected as well as the environment. And these has led to significant damage to our lake environments. Unfortunately, that's what I had to say. So I just want to check if, yes, thank you. That kind of sums up the situation for me. Thank you very much, Mr. Furtado. We will now start the round of questions with Mr. Muse. Mr. Muse, over to you for 6 minutes.
Thank you to this study. I'd like to direct some questions to Mr. Lazelle from Boating Ontario. And you set out in your testimony some of the economic impact of the industry of $4.5 billion in Ontario, 520 plus members in your association. Of course, those are direct jobs, and then there's indirect jobs, as we know, $4.6 billion in tax revenue across Canada. And of course, I think a point that you made very well is that recreational boating is a important economic driver and lifeblood in many communities and parts of this country. And so I want to, it's probably a three-part question, but you didn't talk too much in your 5 minutes, which were very precise, as the chair pointed out, about the so-called luxury tax, which we know the average boat owner is more middle class than luxury. But there's also the impact of the carbon tax, which we saw go up 23% in April and is on its way to quadrupling. So that's a bit of a double whammy to your industry from a tax policy perspective. So maybe you can talk a bit about that, both of the taxes and then, of course, the cumulative impact and what that's happening, what that's doing in terms of direct and indirect jobs, and I think, as you've mentioned previously, driving boats south of the border.
Excellent. Thank you very much for the question. And I guess I'll tackle this from two perspectives: the luxury tax and the carbon tax, as you outlined, and I'll touch briefly on the jobs impact. We have been monitoring since the implementation of the luxury tax, or the family tax as we call it, because $250,000 does not buy a luxury yacht; it buys a family small cruiser or pontoon boat in our world now. As opposed for families alternative to cottages and what have you. We've watched over 100 jobs, disappear from the industry already. And I think, one of the key impacts, if I may, is I'll reflect on the parliamentary budget officer projected $52 million in luxury tax receipts from the boating sector alone between September 1st, 2022 and September 1st, 2024. In June, the CRA reported that up to that point, so 21 months and 1 week, they had actually seen receipts of $12 million. And knowing, as we know now, that the boats are not in inventory because the dealers in the industry have refused to bring the boats to Canada because the consumer has said they will not pay the tax, it's not even possible that they collected any more than perhaps a couple of $1 million over that balance period. So there's a massive shortfall here in the PBO's projections of what the luxury tax would bring because, again, the industry has said we're not going to bring the boats here because the consumer has said we are not paying this tax. What we have seen as a result of the tax is an exodus of boat purchases into the United States. Many Canadian families, as we know, own homes in Florida and the southern U.S. And the comments they're making to the industry are, I'll simply buy a new boat in Florida and I'll keep the boat there and I'll leave the old boat in Canada and I'll let it traverse around Canadian waterways. Those new boats being bought. Yep.
And I know.
Okay.
So, because you indicated a number of different issues that you're dealing with Transport Canada, the flares issue, the mandatory wear, vehicle registration data, invasive aquatic species. And so I just wanted to give you a chance maybe to elaborate a bit more on each of those. And what are the pain points that you're dealing with Transport Canada on those issues? And then maybe a bit of a comparison as to, how would that compare to 5-10 years ago in terms of this increasing regulatory burden and the relationship that you have with Transport Canada in actually providing input on these things?
Okay. Thank you for that question as well. Let's start with mandatory PFD wear. We have been at the table with Transport on this issue for several years now. And I think the most challenging thing is that the survey that was released is, as I said in my opening comments, it's bent to guide the respondent to supporting mandatory wear. The industry is fully prepared to support mandatory wear on human vessels, children under 12 while underway, mandatory wear on personal watercraft, and persons being towed. But there are other circumstances where we do not support mandatory wear. That is a real change in how our conversations and dialogue with Transport had been, and the change. On the flare situation, it was utterly shocking to us when the recycling program with the Power Squadron was pulled back, and we have seen it. I know there's another meeting later this week with John Gullick from CPS joining. He's going to speak to the number of flares that are piling up across the industry. And that the data comment is one that has been around for a long time and been used, and it's the data is with Transport, and it would help us enormously to plan to grow this sector that so many Canadian families are engaged in if we could find a way to get that data. We don't want the consumer data, to be clear. What we want is the product data to help us grow this industry. I hope that answers your questions. Tremendous. Yes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Muse. Prochainement, nous avons Monsieur Lauzon.
And next we have Mr. Lauzon. Thank you, Chair. I would like to thank all the witnesses who are here today on a file that is very close to my heart, with 41 municipalities and hundreds of lakes in my district, and we're represented here with 3 witnesses from my district, and I'd also like to thank them, Jean Dacret, Jean-Sylvain Martel, and also Benjamin Furtado, Urban Planning. So my first question for Mr. Furtado You spoke earlier about reserved areas, and you talked about restrictions on speed in the middle of the lakes, or that are central to the lakes. So could you talk about the restrictions that you are entitled to impose, given the legislation that we brought in by the Department of Transportation along the shorelines with speed restrictions and also with mooring? Could you speak a bit? I'm not sure if I understood the question, but from what I understand, the restrictions you just mentioned are pretty much what we were able to get about 10 years, for about the past 10 years. The first 70 meters, you can go at 25 kilometers an hour, if I'm not mistaken, and for the rest, in the middle of the lake, it's 70 kilometers per hour. So I want to talk to you about the 25 kilometers a little bit more. How did you bring in measures in order to monitor these speeds? And you set up signals that indicate what, or signals for the allowed limit, but what do you do when people go too fast, when they don't respect that and can damage the shorelines? Well, we hired a private firm, a security firm, that comes out onto our lakes during the summer, especially during season periods when there are a lot of people, a lot of users, and the municipality pays for it, even if the SQ offers a service. But the SQ cannot be everywhere in Quebec, the provincial police. So we mandated that firm to monitor what we have the power to do with that restriction on speed for boats. Perhaps a question for Ms. Crête, which is a little bit more political in nature, because the complaints that come in various places from residents who also, or complaints from the municipality that carry out environmental studies for the protection of waterways and invasiveness. Ms. Crête, did you notice any change in recent years based on the experience that you have at the municipality? Thank you for the question. Indeed, over the last number of years, of course, the amount of traffic in the lake has changed. There are different types of boats, and the kinds of boats that we see on the lake has changed as well. For a number of years now, we've seen more wake boats and surf boats, and we see increasingly boats, not boats, but paddle boards. So we see conflicts in use, or children on pedal boats along the shore, or on paddle boards or small kayaks, and we have wake boats or wake surfs that make big waves and then travel on the lake, and there are a number of complaints in that regard from people along the shorelines who say that they don't want to let their children swim along the beach precisely because of the big waves, which makes it dangerous and is an issue. And we also have all the issues caused regarding erosion and oversized waves. For example, there are a lot of complaints of equipment broken and citizens who inform us that the big waves cause their boat to come up on the dock or rub against the dock, which causes damage to the hull. Or they also move around. Thank you, Ms. Crête. Ms. Ojik, I imagine that in your area it's similar, all the aspects that our previous testimony, Ms. Crête, is it similar, or do you have any clarifications that you can give the committee? Well, it's very similar. We did an inventory and we classified things in a category, and it was mandated by the municipalities nearby. So there is an increase in the number of smaller boats, paddle boards, for example, and kayaks, and an increase also in the number of, for example, wake boats and sea-doo type vessels. And we had a survey of some 600 users of the lake, and we see that there is an issue, the waves that disturb other users, and that there are safety-related issues, with 30% of respondents saying that they were afraid for their safety in boating on the lake because of the other users on the lake. So it's very similar, and it is an issue that is amplified following the pandemic. Just a brief question. We have barely 30 seconds, Ms. Orjic, but you have some specific actions that you talked about, changing national standards, and in order to improve national standards already in place, we heard Ms. Cret, who took actions, and now it makes it possible to bring about certain changes. What national standards should be changed, in your opinion, specifically? Well, I quoted two studies, one from the University of Quebec in Montreal, which shows how the waves generate erosion when you have oversized waves of from more than 300 meters away. It's based on that study in order to create standards, and that is what was done by Vermont. In their state, they brought in standards based on studies that were carried out in Quebec. And so they are standards regarding sports that generate oversized waves and practice those sports farther from the shores in deeper area. We have a maximum of still fairly shallow water, and those sports there's some areas where they cause less impact, so there's no problem practicing those sports in the middle of large lakes such as ours, but the problem is when they do it in shallow bays. Thank you very much. Thank you. Next, we have Mr. Barcelou Duval. Over to you. You have 6 minutes, please. Thank you, Chair, and thank you for the witnesses. This is a very important study for us. I heard some of the witnesses complaining about the amount of time it takes to bring in regulations in their municipality, both for Lac-Simon and for Lac-Mont-Magog. In our district, we started working on regulations in 2007 and was brought in 2024, or 2017 to 2024. So it took 7 years to get a bylaw in the municipality. So Ms. Orjic, do you find that it's normal for it to take so much time for that process? Well, we have hundreds of thousands of lakes in Canada. So if we want to bring in this process every time we want to better regulate things on our lakes, that's why we believe that the regulations, the national regulations would be more practical, avoiding each municipality have to go through that process for their own lake. So you think there should be a kind of a national framework that would apply on a broader basis? Because right now, as I understand it, if there are no regulations that are requested by a city or municipality, then there are simply no regulations. So then it's a free-for-all. It's the Far West, no rules unless the municipality applies. Precisely, exactly. And among the types of requests that exist right now, have there been any requests that that are not possible that you'd like to have added as possible tools that could be used in certain regions? Well, tools to facilitate the process, actually to simplify the procedure for the regulations for municipalities. So the tool exists, but it's not very well adapted, and you have to rely on a very lengthy procedure with public consultations and so on. To be clear, perhaps I was not clear enough in my question, some cities have told me that would have liked to prohibit anchorage in certain sectors in some of the possible tools. Apparently, they cannot prohibit mooring in certain areas or anchorage in certain areas. In some areas, they don't mind if they go at speed, but sometimes it's not the speed, but it's the wave. But you cannot regulate a wave, you can only regulate speed. So do you find that it's consistent, that type of situation, and you have similar things at your local area? Yes, that's the thing. It's difficult to measure a wave. This is why we're talking about, I believe that it's better to regulate, for example, practices such as sports that generate oversized waves or speed, because it's difficult to measure a wave. So I think that we should base it on scientific studies to regulate based on the existing data. And do you think that cities ought to follow a long regulatory process, or are we pushing the burden onto them, or do you think we should just trust them to apply the requests done by the municipalities and say that people are locally elected to make those decisions? Well, I think that, as I said earlier, standards could be applied everywhere without even having to request that by the municipality and go through a procedure, because it's scientific. So these are scientific data, and I believe that we could apply them everywhere. And after that, there are always some local cases, for example, which are not connected with the depth or the distance from the shore. For example, there may be plants in aquatic plants growing there or whatever. If there are aquatic plants in a particular area, it's not so much the evidence, it's what the municipality requests. So a lot of evidence is requested, and just the presence, like in Fitch Bay, of water plants or aquatic plants. There are also wetlands around there, and there are these plants growing just in many places, and there are studies that say that the sediment can, if it's stirred up, and can damage the plants. So Transport Canada is asking us to find that in Fitch Bay, the boats are causing problems in that particular sector. So it's too heavy a procedure. Thank you. Sometimes it takes a PhD, almost a PhD thesis, to be able to bring in a bylaw in a small municipality, whereas actually the municipalities are stuck with doing all of that work with Transport Canada, which leaves them to their own devices. But perhaps a question for Lac Simon. If I still have time, you were able to bring in restrictions. Municipalities talked to me about the fact that they were caught off guard after having, once they made a request, they were the ones that had to also pay for the whole facilities and the buoys and the publication of regulations and awareness material, and also to pay the people who enforce the regulations. So could it have been practical for you to have some financial assistance for these types of expenditures, which are quite substantial?
Désolé, j'étais pas là.
I'm sorry, I wasn't there at that time, but our elected official has told me yes, assistance would have been welcome. Even today, if we were to make a new request for restrictions, I think it would be quite welcome to have some assistance, because as you can see, it's not an easy task. And we don't know if there are new procedures now. This was done some 15 years ago, that procedure, so perhaps the procedures have changed since then. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Furtado and Mr. Basu-Duval, and now Mr. Bachrach.
Witnesses for being here for this study. I'll start with some questions for Ms. Ojek. You've mentioned this idea in your report. There's a recommendation around potentially measuring the pleasure boat support capacity of Lake Memphremagog. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. I'm interested in this idea of the carrying capacity of a lake to support pleasure boats. How would you go about measuring that sort of thing, or estimating what the capacity of the lake is for boat traffic?
C'est une bonne question. Il y a plusieurs études qui existent pour mesurer la...
That's a good question. There are a number of studies that exist to measure the amount of support capacity of a waterway, a lake, because we've increased by 25% the number of boats on Lake Memphremagog. Can we keep on increasing it indefinitely, or one day could there be some limit in the number of boats? And we could talk about a limit by type of boat. If we end up with the number of wake boats, there are scientific studies that have looked into this in Europe, in the US, and we're proud to have chosen a master's student that will look into this next year, and we'll do a review of the literature on everything that exists in terms of studies and the support capacity of a lake for navigation, for boating. So I've seen and read about that, and there may be a certain amount of water area per type of boat, a certain number of square kilometers for certain types of vessels, and measure the number of vessels and the limit on the number per lake.
Capacity is the idea that the impact on the environment is relative to the number of boats. I represent a huge rural riding with many lakes. On most of those lakes, you could be in your boat for hours and hours, if not days, and never see another boat. So the idea of national standards, I wonder if it could somehow accommodate the fact that Canada is very diverse and there are huge regions of our country where there is never going to be the density of recreational boating traffic to necessitate regulations like the ones that are being contemplated. How would you establish national standards that accommodate those different contexts in our country?
En fait,
no matter the waterway, if a boat is less than 300 meters from the banks and generates high level waves, it always causes erosion in the end. So as Vermont did it, I think it would be much easier for us to have a national standard based on science, rather than asking each municipality to regulate its own waterways or to prove that their waterways are endangered. We saw Numineng that were able in 7 years to regulate one of their waterways, and right now it took them 7 years to regulate one waterway. There are a number of standards that could be applicable. Maybe not necessarily the limits on the on the boats, but the distance allowed for people to practice sports that could create waves, or the speed of these boats within a certain radius. I mean, it will bring us to the same situation finally.
Be responsible for enforcing those standards and paying for the enforcement of those standards.
Really good question. I am a nonprofit, so I'm not provincial or municipal or even federal government, but I think Vermont, they decided to act at the state level. The state is in charge. I don't know if that's the best way of going about it. It's a really good question.
And thinking about the Canadian context and the fact that lakes near highly populated areas often have a lot of recreational boating traffic and pressure, and therefore environmental impacts, as you've mentioned. There are many lakes in many areas of Canada that have less impact and less pressure and have very little federal government presence. And so if the federal government were charged with enforcing national standards, that effort would predominantly take place in highly populated areas or in cottage country or places with a lot of recreational boat traffic. And the question would be, how do you allocate the costs of enforcement so that they're fair to all Canadians? Because, of course, if Transport Canada is doing that enforcement and it's paid for by all Canadian citizens who pay taxes, then it's going to be challenging to build that fairness and equity. That's just an editorial comment on my part. The last question I have for Ms. Ojik is whether she sees a role for the provinces in this regulatory process, or whether municipalities and the federal government are the two jurisdictions that should really be preoccupied with this challenge that she's laid out.
Again, another good question to ponder as to whether Quebec, the Quebec government could step in. I think the challenge right now is for municipalities think that the procedure is too burdensome. And I would like to simply ask the question to the Lac Simon people who are working with the municipality to determine whether if the procedure is streamlined for the municipalities and whether they can come up with standards that are based on science. Maybe they themselves can be able to enforce regulations at their level. Unfortunately, we are out of time. Maybe for the next round, we'll turn it over to Mr. Viss.
Towards Mr. Lazell. At the end of your previous comments, you mentioned that the PBO reports on the luxury tax were severely short in terms of the total impact it had on the sector. And you outlined that this was because Canadian consumers were not purchasing boats in the United States, but were going south of the border to spend significant money on new products. Is that correct?
One minor adjustment. The Canadian consumers are purchasing boats in the United States. They are not purchasing the boats in the luxury tax regime threshold in Canada.
One of my big concerns about this tax on recreational boats is that the workers that make a living servicing the boats, doing repairs, general maintenance, might not see new business because those purchases are not being made in Canada. Do you share that concern as well?
Gravely. We share that concern about the people that haul boats, clean boats, do pre-purchase prep work, winterize boats, store boats. Yes, and those are the blue collar jobs that we know have already been lost in the sector.
How many jobs have been lost since this tax was implemented?
We had a survey running in the first 12 months of the tax implementation, and at that time we were showing over 100. We have not had a current survey in 2024. Certainly, it's expanded since then. Across the country, representative of about 200 companies that had reported.
I noticed on the tax exempts certain types of vessels, namely commercial fishing. But what I'm concerned about, and I come from an area of the country where lots of people come from around the world to go fishing, is that it boats used for tourism. Tourism has. Yeah. And the type of equipment that tourism operators and small business owners are using?
Certainly the type of equipment, because what's happening is the operators are simply not updating the vessels that are on our waterways because of the tax. So yeah, it's from a type of equipment perspective, yes.
But what about now I'm just going to turn to the carbon tax for a minute. How many boat manufacturers are there in Canada?
I wouldn't have the exact number. It wouldn't be over 15 in the large scale. We have Princecraft in Quebec, Stanley Boats in Ontario, Westwind Industries in British Columbia, and a number on BC Island. It wouldn't be 20.
Number of manufacturers in the country building recreational vessels that would be subject to this tax.
Correct. We estimate 96% of the boats that come into Canada come from the U.S.
Do you believe the government thought it was a good idea, Canadian workers and businesses, when there is such a small manufacturing base in the country already?
Point of order.
Yes. We're just going to stop the time there. You have 2 minutes, 1 minute, 20 seconds left. Ms. Koutrakis.
Yeah, I'm just wondering, Mr. Chair, the relevance of this line of questioning, given that the study that we're doing today has nothing to do with luxury tax.
Come on, guys. We're talking about boating. The tax applies to boating. This could not be more relevant. This is ridiculous. Could we please get on with the questioning? Okay, I'm going to let you continue with the line of questioning.
Before that, I'd just like to respond to the point of order raised by Ms. Koutrakis. Actually, under the government...
Mr. Viss, it's not a point of order. She had her point of order. I ruled. The floor is yours. You have a minute,
sir.
20 seconds left.
Okay. Well, in response to that question, why in the world would this government impose such a punitive tax on such a small number of boat manufacturers in Canada?
I wish I could truly answer that question. What I can tell you is that the industry traveled to Ottawa repeatedly to represent and explain what the projections and forecasts were. And sadly, our forecasts are coming true. Ottawa chose not to listen.
Thank you very much, Mr. Viss. Next, we'll go to Mr. Yakino. Mr. Yakino, the floor is yours, sir. You have 5 minutes.
Merci, Monsieur.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I would like to thank all the witnesses. My questions will be addressed to the representative of Lac-Simon municipality. So, how is the municipality educating boat users on environmental protection, and on what is this based, and on what studies, what university studies are you basing your claims? Can you further elaborate, please? Firstly, in terms of awareness raising, we have regulations, and we also have a news bulletin. We have a web page that is very visible, and we hand over brochures to people coming to the different docks, and they receive the necessary information in terms of awareness raising, and also the regulations that are applicable, as well as the different sectors where they can practice water sports, because we cannot forbid or prohibit those. And as I mentioned earlier in my last response, we have contracted a private firm that's in charge of equally raising awareness and trying to enforce the small part of regulations that we can enforce. So I think we're actually very proactive in that sense, and we're basing ourselves on policy, provincial policy on environmental protection, which is mainly focused on the erosion of our riverbanks, and I'm sure we can find multiple studies out there to back this. So a question through you, Mr. Chair. Is it possible, because you've raised quite a number of good points and different ways through which you are enforcing this, can you table documents to support these information which you're sharing with the committee? Are you talking about the awareness raising piece? Yes. Of course, I can send you all the documentation. What are the steps that you've undertaken to ensure that regulations are enforced and respected, besides contracting the services of this private security firm? Which areas are the most impacted? Are you trying to say what the rules, the regulations that are the most disregarded? Well, earlier on, your colleagues talked about activities that are contrary to the rules and certain behaviors on Lac-Simon. So what happens when someone is in violation of those regulations? What are the processes in place within the municipality? In general, there is, we identify the person who has violated the regulations, and he receives a fine. The negative impact of these regulations, how do the consequences, how do these behaviors negatively impact the environment then? Like we mentioned earlier, there's the erosion, there's equally the resurfacing of underwater sediments. And then we mentioned another phenomenon where some people will dock their boats in shallow waters. One last question for you. So for you, is this a fuel tax as suggested by my colleagues on the other side? Does the fuel tax have an effect or consequence on regulation? No, none at all.
compris votre réponse, monsieur.
Sorry, I didn't hear you, sir. There's no impact. My question was, is the fuel tax or the carbon tax, does the carbon tax have a secondary impact or an incidence on regulation? Not at all, not that I know of. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Yakano. Next up, we have Mr. Barcelou Duval. Over to you for 2 minutes, please. 2.5 minutes, rather. Mr. Chair, up to now, we've had the opportunity to discuss the regulatory framework on for navigation on these lakes by municipalities, but I'd like to know from Mem Fremagog or Lac Simon whether you have comments on the prerequisites in order to be able to use a boat. Do you have any knowledge on how it works? How do you come about driving a boat or getting a license? Do you think that the procedures in place are enough to secure such licenses and permissions? Maybe I'd start with Mem Fremagok. Well, you need to take an online exam in order to secure a license, and I don't think there's any way you can fail this exam. And each year we recruit a group of youngsters who patrol, and none of them has ever failed the exam. And there's questions regarding the environment, lake environment. So there's no question on staying far of the banks in order to avoid erosion. There's no question in that regard. Maybe this could be an opportunity to educate boat users on the environmental impact of their activities. So in order to navigate Lake Mem Fremagog, the users need to have a license that something to prove that they are a resident. If they don't have that documentation, the person will have to wash their boat in order to avoid the propagation of invasive species. But someone from the community can navigate the Lac Saint-Laurent or any other waterway and Lake Mem Fremagog without needing to wash their boat before getting into our lake. So the cleaning or washing could be done or not, depending on whether you're from the community or not, and your authorization lasts a season long. Thank you very much, Mr. Barcelou Duval.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll ask a question to Mr. Lazelle about PFD regulations, and I don't come at this from any particular angle other than being curious about what the data already say. I'm sure he's familiar with some of the data around recreational boating accidents, and I wonder what his recommendations would be based on what he knows about who drowns in recreational boating accidents. Should it be based on the size of the craft? Should it be based on propulsion? What is the recommendation thus far? I know you're recommending a fairly lengthy survey based on law enforcement, but I know there's data out there. What can those data tell us?
The data as it exists today is inconclusive, specifically when it comes to the length of the vessels involved in the incidents. And that is what we have communicated with Transport Canada and our partners around the table. That is what we desire to have, is to actually have the facts of the size of the boats that are causing the problem. One of the concerns that we've seen is typically when the data is presented, there's a breakout of canoes and then kayaks, but then every single power boat that's involved in an incident across Canada is lumped into one lump. And that's where we've come out with collectively saying that we support mandatory wear for human-powered vessels, because if you pull the canoes and the kayaks together, the incidence with those is quite frankly higher than it is with power boats. What we want is meaningful solutions that still allow Canadians to go boating and enjoy the sport, while properly protecting. We feel that a proper survey, comprehensive, right now we have the OPP who have said they want 6 meters and down. We want a comprehensive survey that truly collects the data across Canada, the RCMP, the Coast Guard, Sécurité de Québec, OPP, and everyone else, Toronto Police and what have you, that properly tracks the size of the boats that are involved in the incidents, and then we can make evidence-based decisions.
Okay, thanks, Mr. Lazell. I'm looking, and I'm not sure if you're familiar with this study, but there is a study from the Drowning Prevention Research Centre in collaboration with Canada from 2008 to 2017, and it compiles all of the recreational boating related deaths by boat type and in terms of boats over 5 meters and under 5 meters. I just wonder if 5 meters is a logical cutoff, a logical threshold for analyzing data. You work with a lot of boats. Is that sort of a common threshold for defining small and large powerboats?
It depends on who you talk to. 5 meters for many is very much a small boat. Boats under 30 feet for others is a small boat. So I am somewhat familiar with that study. We have challenged with some of the data as it was collected and presented in that, which is why we have made the request for a more comprehensive survey from law enforcement. To answer your question, you know, 5 meters is again a number that's out there. What we feel should be happening is the actual size of the boats that are involved, not just a threshold. There's a difference between a 12-foot boat and a 16-foot boat. And that's what we're talking. 5 meters is basically 16 feet, where there's a big difference between a 12-footer and a 16. And that's what we're looking to secure is that data.
Mr. Bachrach and Mr. Lazell, as a watercraft operator myself, I too dream of summer that lasts forever.
Thank you.
I wish to thank our witnesses for their time and contribution today.
Witnesses, merci beaucoup. This meeting is suspended.
Thank you very much.
We will begin with opening remarks from our next round of witnesses. We'll introduce from the National Marine Manufacturers Association of Canada, Marie-France McKinnon, Executive Director by video conference. From l'Organisme de bassin versant de la Yamaska, Madame Sonia Daou, General Manager par vidéoconférence. Port Rowan Harbour Committee, Ron Banks by video conference. Madame Daou, je sais que vous avez...
Ms. Daou, I know that you have until 5:15 with us, so I'll give you the floor first for your opening remarks. 5 minutes, please. Very well, thank you very much, and hello, everyone. So, to begin with, our organization, Yamaska, was mandated by the Yamaska Committee, composed of certain mayors, the region of Mr. Simon Pierre Tremblay, to study the impact of wake boats and the speed of motorboats on shoreline erosion and suspension of sediments in certain reaches of the Yamaska River. Today I'm presenting the conclusions of this review, which may also apply in other contexts. A few contexts to be defined: eutrophication, which is the phenomenon of the aging of waterways, which takes place, as in the case of human beings, except that now it's happening at a much accelerated speed, which is worrisome. And also the wave effect or wave action. When boats go by, each wave has a certain origin and energy, and it has kinetic turbulence energy that causes problems here. So the more quickly the wave arrives at the shoreline, the more its energy acts on the shoreline instead of in the water. And we're going to talk about the wake boats, which are a type of boat that make waves and make a wake, and they're especially shaped according to the ballast system that enables them to carry out certain sports such as wake surf and wakeboarding, which you've heard about in other testimony. To evaluate the impact of the waves caused by boats, and especially wake boats, we have to be able to demonstrate the difference between wave caused by wind and caused by boats. The energy when a wave arrives at the shoreline is higher than the energy for waves that are natural, and it's reasonable to believe that the shoreline and the bottom of the lakes are damaged more by wakes from boats, which have a significant impact on erosion and on the stirring up of sediments. Generally speaking, boats that go at a normal speed do not contribute very much to wave energy as compared to those caused by wind, whereas the wakeboat type waves have more impact on the shorelines and generate waves that transfer a greater amount of energy to the shoreline than does wind or other types of boats, or flat-boated or trolling boats, or boats that have like speedboats. We're talking about 4 to 12 times higher amount of energy, depending on which study is consulted. It is therefore reasonable to assert that boats of the wakeboat type going by regularly accelerates shoreline erosion. Some of these same studies will also demonstrate a positive correlation between turbidity and suspended phosphorus, which will demonstrate an increase in wave energy by boats, which can increase the concentration of phosphorus in the water through the stirring effect of different sediments at the bottom, and also releasing nutrients, which will accelerate eutrophication. In addition to these concepts, we have to add the speed the boat travels, which increases the degradation, as was mentioned, and significant increase in shoreline degradation for boats. And we're going to talk about low damage at below 10 kilometers per hour. So we're also going to talk about ecosystems with wake boats involved, an increase in the risk of invasion by invasive species, alien invasive species, and also the importance of cleaning boats. So you understand that with the ballast system, you have to clean the inside of the boat, not only the outside, because it can cause greater problems. Disruption of aquatic plants by turbulence, and also wildlife habitats because of turbulence. And finally, disruption of bird nesting sites because of sound and wave impact. So wake boats cannot circulate near the shore the distance necessary by the studies between 90 to 190 meters away from the shore. So considering that a number of the areas of Yamaska, as is the case in certain other waterways and lakes, do not have the required width for that type of boat, our recommendation is to prohibit the use of that type of boat. In other words, the practice of wake surf and wakeboarding, and also to limit the speed at which those boats can travel to 10 kilometers per hour. We believe that with the new knowledge we've acquired and with future scientific knowledge, we could better supervise the boats and better share our waterways. Thank you, Ms. Daou. Exactly right on the dot with 5 minutes. We appreciate that here. Thank you. And now, Ms. Marie-France McKinnon, you have 5 minutes for your opening comments. Over to you. Thank you, Chair, and thank you to the committee for your invitation.
National Marine Manufacturers Association of Canada. As the leading association representing the recreational boating industry in our country, we have over 80 member companies, including renowned boat and engine manufacturers, marine accessories providers, and service organization. The recreational boating industry is a vital component of our Canadian economy, provides over 80,000 jobs across Canada, particularly in rural areas where these jobs can be a lifeline for our local economies.
Our industry contributes more than $9.2 billion to Canada's GDP and generates $4.6 billion of tax receipts for municipal, provincial, and federal governments.
Fundamental principle, the right of Canadians to access their waterways. La NMMA Canada encourage les processus.
We encourage consultation that actively involves national, regional, and local boating organizations. This engagement is crucial for ensuring that the voices of recreational boaters are heard and taken into consideration when regulations are proposed.
Regulation under the VOR and seek non-regulatory consensus-building solutions to local issues. We cannot have a situation that creates barriers accessing our lakes, our beautiful rivers, and coastal areas, which all Canadians have the right to access. In the upcoming regulatory changes outlined in the Canada Gazette, we're asking for a formal consultation process when local authorities request navigation restrictions on any of their waterways. We firmly believe we can find practical, non-regulatory solutions to local issues by working together, government, industry, and local community, and recreational boaters. It's through collaboration and community consensus that we can enhance safety and enjoyment on all our waterways without a patchwork of needless red tape and restrictions. We also need critical investment to modernize Canada's outdoor infrastructure to make recreational boating more accessible. Upgrading our aging marinas, boat ramps, and public access points is essential for enhancing safety, promoting outdoor recreation, and stimulating tourism. Ces améliorations offrent une meilleure...
These improvements will provide a better experience for boaters, foster community and environmental stewardship, and inspire a lasting appreciation of our natural resources benefiting future generations.
Issue impacting our industry, the luxury tax, which you've heard about. This tax has severely affected the Canadian boating industry, leading to a crucial decline in sales of recreational boats over 250,000. Let's be clear, this downturn threatens jobs, the livelihood within the sector, hardworking Canadians who are proudly building Canadian products. La loi sur les taxes sur les articles.
The select luxury items tax must be amended so that recreational boats are no longer subject to it.
Figures. They also lead to a loss of associate tax revenues for the government. CRA data from September 2022 to June 2024 showed total collection of $12 million. That's $40 million short of the PBO's own projection. As a result, people are buying boats in the U.S., not here in Canada. We're also losing critical tourism dollars, especially in BC, Ontario, and Quebec. So this isn't a tax on luxury boat and Canada's richest. It's a tax on the middle class Canadian jobs that depends on this sector. It's a tax on small businesses, on rural communities, and local economies across this country. Je vous remercie de l'invitation.
Thank you for your time. I look forward to working together to ensure that all Canadians may access their waterways and make memories with their families that will last for generations. Thank you, Ms. McKinnon. Next, we have Mr. Banks.
Thank you. My name is Ron Banks. I live in Port Rowan, Ontario, and I've operated my business here in Port Rowan for 37 years. And while operating my boat building and restoration business, I was a frequent user of the Port Rowan Marina Harbor. Today, I'm representing the Port Rowan Harbor Committee. It's a volunteer committee, and our purpose is to work with Norfolk County to ensure the preservation and enhancement of the Port Rowan Harbor Marina as a public resource that is accessible and sustainable, beautiful for the enjoyment and well-being of the community and the visitors alike. This is a very unique waterfront property in Norfolk that offers full public access while still maintaining the commercial and cultural aspects of its operations as it has for many generations. The park area of the harbor is used by the public to host a 3-day Bay Fest celebration, farmers markets in the fall, every Friday afternoon, prayer services on Sunday mornings from May through September, and the occasional concert in the park. Norfolk County has a detailed report outlining items they feel need to be accomplished to maintain the operation of the harbor over the upcoming years. Most importantly, dredging of the harbor so boaters will have safe access to the marina. Improving the launch ramp and improving transient dockage would attract more boaters to the harbor. And we recognize the importance of the harbor marina facility to Port Rowan and all of Norfolk County. In short, there's no shortage of interest, suggestions, or willingness from volunteer groups such as the Lions Club and others to accomplish these goals. Only a lack of funding for infrastructure projects. And we support Norfolk in all aspects of fundraising and offer whatever assistance this committee can while developing the policies that will ensure the public ownership and access while maintaining the safe operation of this valuable resource for many generations to come. So basically just speaking about the Port Rowan Harbor and a little bit of history about it.
Thank you very much, Mr. Banks. We'll begin our line of questioning today with Mr. Lawrence. Mr. Lawrence, the floor is yours. You have 6 minutes, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And my questions today will be for Ms. McKinnon. Ms. McKinnon, I want to talk to you a little bit about what has happened over the last 9 years and the impact on your industry. Over those last 9 years, we've seen an exponential increase in red tape. We've seen an exponential increase in taxation. Specifically, I talk about the carbon tax, which of course will increase the cost of fuel, a major cost if you're owning a recreational boat. We've also seen, of course, as you mentioned, the luxury tax. Your industry is responsible for thousands of jobs. Recreational boating represents billions of dollars to our economy. Could you talk to us a little bit about how the carbon tax, the luxury tax, and the increase in red tape has affected your industry?
Thank you for the question. I'll focus on, the luxury tax is a prime example. It's not a tax just on boats. It's the tax on the jobs that we're seeing across the country. And what seems to get lost in a lot of this is the broader impact above and beyond recreational boats. And it's not just about our sector, but you think about a marina and everything that goes around that, the tourism of people who come to boat in specific areas. So the tourism impact is huge. And, Mr. Lazelle earlier talked about the jobs lost. But that's specific to our industry. When you think about local restaurants, marinas, shops, everything that's related, all of these taxes compiled together are a huge, huge burden on our companies. And we talked about lack of, we only have a handful of manufacturers left in our country because it makes a lot more sense sometimes to go south of the border for manufacturers. The same way now that boat owners are looking to buy south of the border because of the tax, burden on Canada. So the burden on our businesses and manufacturers who are here trying to sell boat, to export boats to other markets, all of these added costs are huge. The extra tax on, recreational boat owners, if you own a boat, it's one thing to have the carbon tax and to have the luxury tax, but there's some areas where it costs you $350 to put your boat in the water for a day to go take your kid fishing. That's unreasonable. Canadians should have access to all waterways without seeming to be, privatization, if you want, of specific areas. So all of these taxes, it's a burden, and it's taking a toll on manufacturers and businesses that are trying to grow to grow their businesses here in Canada.
Thank you, Ms. McKinnon. I'll just break that down on a couple of issues that you raised. So first, I'll start off with the carbon tax. The quadrupling of the carbon tax would substantially increase the cost of fuel that would be used by boat owners. And I would point out that 60% of boat owners are actually earn less than $100,000. So this is not the ultra wealthy. This is the middle class. Would the quadrupling of the carbon tax hurt or help your industry?
It would hurt the industry. Any extra tax is hurting the industry. So when you think about owning a boat, like you said, most boat owners they're not yacht owners. These are middle-class Canadians who just have a boat and taking their kid fishing or their pontoon on the water with their family on the weekend. So the gas, everything that is added onto Canadians right now to be out there and enjoy our beautiful lake and rivers, it's getting hard on Canadians, and we're seeing it in declined sales. And we had great sales during the pandemic when our industry saved a lot of Canadians, because that was the number one thing you could do and get out there and enjoy it. But all of these burden of extra taxes now with the carbon tax and luxury tax, it's taking a toll on our sector, and it's a lot of jobs that are at stake and a lot of Canadian manufacturers and small businesses that are impacted.
So we heard from both your points with respect to the carbon tax and the luxury tax that it applies to Canadians in the Canadian industry. Now, if in fact the folks, and it'll affect the middle class, the workers who are out in the factories who are building these boats, it'll affect those, like you said, the mom and dad who want to take their daughter or son fishing. Now, for those folks who have yachts, they have an ability to get away with this. So, because they could go to the United States, and would they have to pay, and if they bought a boat in the United States, would they have to pay Canadian luxury tax or Canadian carbon tax?
So they just leave their boats out in the U.S. It's way easier. If you're going to buy a yacht or a boat over $250,000 and decide to buy it in Florida, for the amount of money you're saving on the luxury tax, you can fly to Florida a lot of times or drive down. So decisions are being made. And what's also being lost here, when I talked about tourism, is I was talking to a dealer in Quebec who said he used to do 70% of his sales in Quebec, 30% across the border. He is now 70% across the border, 30% in Quebec. What does that do? That's allowing Canadians or Quebecers to cross the border and discover other beautiful areas in northern states that's available for boating. So we're losing out on that tourism aspect.
So this is a tax that hurts Canadian families and that particularly affects Quebecers.
Absolutely.
Lawrence, prochainement, nous avons M. Lauzon. À vous la parole, 6 minutes.
Mr. Lauzon, over to you for 6 minutes, please. Thank you, Mr. Chair. My first question is for you, Ms. McKinnon. We're talking about numbers, and right here I'm interested in what you said. You mentioned that we're incentivizing people to buy their boats in Florida. And when someone buys a boat, let's say for $250,000, and you have a 10% tax to pay, which is $25,000 for a luxury tax, and you say it's more interesting. When you cross the border, you have to pay the customs duties on the boat that you bought from Florida to bring it to Canada, and it's generally based on the value of the boat. So, are you not saying that you'd have to pay that tax one other way before coming into Canada? What I'd say is that those who buy boats in Florida would leave them there. They don't bring it over to Canada. That's not the issue. The issue is that they simply leave the boat in the US because it makes more sense to leave it there rather than bring it over to outside of the border and buy and pay the tax. Ms. McKinnon, we have people from my municipality and the 400,000 worth of boats in Montebello in my riding, and those people don't leave their boats in Florida because they have $25,000 dollars in tax to pay. Let's be logical here. I have about 41 municipalities, and each of them you have boat owners. But that's okay. I don't need any further comment on that. Now, let's come back to Ms. Sonia Daou about your organization. I'd like to know what's the nature of your collaboration with municipalities, and I suppose not necessarily knowing your territory well, I imagine you have multiple municipalities that are called upon to work on the Mascot waterways. So how do you collaborate with municipalities in order to share information and disseminate information? Well, it becomes quite complex because I'd have to talk about our funding. We are partly funded by the government of Quebec to organize consultation tables, and based on this, we come up with a roadmap for the waterways. And then the idea is to bring together all the stakeholders within the territory in order to sustainably manage this precious water resource. We have a second part because through this, we have members like committee members, and we work on a project by project basis and based on subsidies. So we don't offer services free of charge. Unfortunately, these are paid services when we collaborate with stakeholders. We have good working relations with different municipalities and MRCs across the territory. And yes, we can play that advisory role. We can equally play a coordinating role. And we can work on several projects like characterizing different urban areas, working on studies, and also offering our expertise when we are solicited. Would like our mandate to be broadened. I know that this isn't within your purview, but would like to collaborate even further and in a more significant manner when it comes to everything that has to do with waterways and the environment. So for your environment and for the for your for the information of the committee, there was in your municipality, there was an effort to create a crisis management committee to take stock of environmental impacts on lakes, and this was done by Fisheries and Oceans Canada and also the original regulatory body in that municipality. This was an excellent collaboration, and this collaboration has been in place since 2021. But coming back, you talked about a term that was new to me. You talked about large wave makers, and these whiteboards and high-speed boats that create high waves. You talked a lot about the height of these waves and talked about the environmental impact on the banks, but you didn't talk much about climate changes that lead to increased temperatures and lead to faster winds that we now see today that we didn't have before. Did you take into consideration climate change impacts in your studies? Well, yeah, we need to make a distinction. Thing is, we really focused on wake boats and speedboats. For speedboats, we didn't find a study with impact, so we focused on wake boats. And we only did a literature review. We did not conduct a study. We didn't conduct any analysis, just a literature review. So what I provided was the findings of studies conducted by other people. So in the findings of this study and the literature review, did you take into consideration climate change? I can't say. I was informed that some of the studies which we referred to, that the people conducting the study would be invited as witnesses. So unfortunately, I cannot respond to that. We would have to measure wind speeds across time, and I don't know that there's a study in that aspect right now. In your study, you consulted many municipalities, boat users, owners of large boats. How many of these stakeholders talked to you about the impact of the cost of fuel that they put in their boats, be it small boats, medium-sized boats, or boats costing $250,000 and more? Thank you once more for your question. We just did a literature review, so we did not consult stakeholders on the ground. And the study stands on 2 pages, and we focused mainly on navigation trends. So to conclude, can you forward those documents for use by this committee? Well, I'll ask the Yamaska committee and forward the documents through your colleague, Mr. Simon Pierre Tremblay. I'll ask if we can forward those, and we'll do that. Thank you, Ms. Daou and Mr. Lezon. Over to you, Mr. Barcelou Duval, for 6 minutes, please. Mr. Chair, thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll start with Ms. Daou because I understood that she'll be leaving soon. I hope she'll still be with us. The first question I had for you, Ms. Daou, you concluded your presentation by mentioning that you're requesting that the speed limits be at 10 kilometers per hour and to prohibit the wakeboards and is that the intention that you will that your working group would table such recommendations? How are you? What are you doing in terms of regulations? Do you think that we need to make such regulations, or the situation as is now is quite convenient because we have other witnesses that spoke to this point before you? Well, yes. So, sorry, I missed the beginning of your question, but we supported the committee with a literature review. But could you please just remind me what the beginning of the question was, please? Thank you. So I realize that you're not in charge of the regulatory process. You simply provided a literature review for use by the committee, and which committee has to then follow up with regulatory process. Yes, when we talked about prohibitions, it was really specific to Yamaska in some areas because it's about 60 kilometers, and we're talking about Saint-Césaire, Saint-Damas, Saint-Hyacinthe, where the river is narrower, where the waterway is narrower. And like other witnesses mentioned, sometimes it depends on the width of the banks and its proximity, and it's on the basis of that that we make the recommendation. So if you have a larger distance, those types of boats can actually navigate, but in other areas. You spoke more specifically and you focused on wakeboards, but with regard to other types of boats, are there any restrictions or any prohibitions in place that you found in your literature review? Are there any aspects that you would like to highlight for the benefit of this committee? Or did you only really focus on wakeboards? Well, yes, my study was mainly based on focused on wakeboards and the issue of speeds of these boats, and taking into consideration the width of the waterway. All of this have an impact, and like I mentioned, is the strength of the waves. And I mentioned that the more time your wave has to get to the bank, the less quickly it will travel, and the closer it is to the banks, the more erosion it will cause and the more impact in the community. Thank you. Maybe I'll turn over to Ms. McKinnon. A question for you, Ms. McKinnon. I don't know if you listened to the witnesses before you. I presume yes, because you were connected. And Ms. Daou talked about the issue of wakeboards as well. And I think wakeboards keep coming up in comments. Now, in terms of water manufacturers of water products, what is the impact on this kind of product? Are there ways of finding a way to mitigate the impact that these such products have on the banks? Absolutely. I think we're all conscious of the impact. We hear about it in the media, and we've had certain complaints. The only piece missing is education. The missing piece is consultation with industry and partnerships between municipalities and the industry. We have provincial marine associations, and in Quebec we have Notice Quebec, and there are many ways of reaching out to people who own boats. There's a lot of education initiatives that we want to take part in. We want to collaborate together to find solutions, both on the part of manufacturers and on the part of users, as well as municipalities and users. So what I'm trying to say is that very often you hear people speaking against wake surfing, and I'm kind of new in the industry, been in the industry for just about a year, but the missing part is the consultations, is collaboration between the industry and and stakeholders, because I think that's what we should be concerned about. How can we work together? That's our approach. We want to collaborate, want to find solutions, and it is only working hand in gloves that we can be able to make everyone happy and also have maybe less trouble. Thank you for your answer. A moment ago, the representative of Boating Ontario Association, who is equally president of boat sellers boat merchants in Canada, he talked about a boat 16 meters, 15 feet. I would like to know, from your experience, how much would it cost to spend a day on the water in terms of fuel costs? Well, I can't say. I don't have that information. I don't know how much it would cost. Maybe if it's just a small boat, a fishing boat, and you're just going to the middle of the boat, and then you go to admire Chateau Montebello. It depends what you're going to be doing during your day. Some people will just anchor somewhere and admire the day. Some people want to fish, and others just want to be somewhere on the dock and admire the view. Thank you, Ms. McKinnon. Thank you, Mr. Barcelou-Duval.
Intrigued by this issue of the luxury tax on boats. And, you know, I take some of the critique of luxury taxes in general seriously. I think they have a decent point. They don't tend to raise a lot of revenue. And in my view, if we're going to address issues like wealth inequality, we should make the rich actually pay their income taxes. And we should prevent them from hiding their wealth in other countries. And if we did that, we would raise a heck of a lot more revenue than dinging them for buying luxury boats or airplanes or these kinds of things. But I think the comment that had a lot of us kind of looking a bit quizzical, Ms. McKinnon, was when you indicated that the luxury tax is hitting the middle class hard. And we heard some comments from my friend, Mr. Lawrence, along the same lines. And I take the point, you know, as it was intended, but I do wonder about your organization's definition of middle class and what income level that would include. Could you share with us what incomes would be considered middle class?
So what was discussed earlier, most people in Canada that owns a boat makes under $100,000. So while this tax on a boat that's $250,000 and over may seem like a lot, that boat is also, you know, lasts a family 25, 30 years. There's a really long, you know, longevity, I guess, of a boat, you could say. So if a person is making $100,000, they're not buying the yacht. And a $250,000 boat is not, it's also not a yacht. It could just be a really nice pontoon that you take your family on. And so it all depends on what boat you're looking at and the impact of that. But it's hitting middle class because there's people working on boats. There's the marina folks. There's the service industry. And everything around that, and the tourism sector that in every local community has people depending on the boating industry and the boating season, which is really, really short in Canada. So it's already a short amount of time, and now you're impacting that by reducing, you know, the boat sales are going down, and the luxury tax has a massive impact on that. And again, it trickles down to the supply chain. It's not just on the boat sales per se.
Sure, I take the point that there are people working in the recreational boating industry that are middle-class Canadians. I think that's a fair point. The question was specifically about people who are buying boats that cost over $250,000, and whether those people, which are really the people that are affected by the tax, are middle-class Canadians. And I know lots of people who earn around $100,000. It's not, you know, it's not the highest salary in Canada, but I don't know any of those folks who are buying $250,000 boats. And so I guess my question, if I may, Mr. Chair, is just your organization must collect very detailed consumer data. I wonder how many of your customers that are buying $250,000 boats earn less than $100,000.
I don't have the information on hand, but I'll make sure to follow up the committee with that information.
Much appreciated.
Thank you very much,
I could also give them some.
Mr. Bachrach. Next, we will go to Dr. Lewis. Dr. Lewis, the floor is yours. You have 5 minutes, please.
Ms. McKinnon, you were speaking about individuals who buy $250,000 boats. Wouldn't some of these individuals actually have to take a loan, a mortgage, refinance their property sometimes to do this?
Yes, it depends on the circumstance of who the boat owner is.
And so these individuals aren't necessarily people who have just $250,000 necessarily sitting around. Sometimes these boats are inherited from their parents also, are they not?
Absolutely, they're inherited, and you're buying the boat on a long-term financing as well. The boat lasts you a very long time, and I have kids in competitive sports. The payment on a boat will be great after my kids are done playing competitive hockey because the amount of money I pay. So it depends on the family and where they're putting, their interest and where they want to spend that money at the end of the month or, during the summertime. So every family has decisions to make, and recreational boating is one of them, but one of many opportunities for Canadians to get outside.
And many of these families sometimes spend their entire summers on the boat rather than going on a luxury vacation per se. Isn't that also correct?
That's correct. And what's beautiful about that, as I keep coming back to, is the tourism impact that brings there. So if that family staying put and, I'm in Ottawa. So if you're going up and down the Ottawa River, I can go to a bunch of different municipalities and go dock at different marinas to have lunch or dinner, and I'm staying local. So there's great opportunities, that has an impact on all the local communities around boating. So, there's different factors, but there's so much more beyond just the boating and being on the water that, in and itself is amazing. But there's a lot more at stake about recreational boating and being on the water with your families.
The economy, yes. Mr. Banks, I have just one quick question for you pertaining to the Port Rowan Harbour. Now, you mentioned the lack of funding for infrastructure projects, and is it possible to maintain a safe Port Rowan Harbour without privatization?
Sorry, Mr. Banks, you're on mute, sir. If I can get you to restart your response and unmute.
Okay, is that better?
That is better. The floor is yours, sir.
Okay. Yes, it is possible. And Norfolk County has done a detailed study that demonstrates that it can operate it and keep it open to the public and fund it through revenues collected.
Are you hearing from marinas that they're experiencing higher electricity and utility costs and operation costs? And does that have anything to do with the carbon tax?
Yes, everybody is experiencing higher costs and passing them on to the users. And I would have to presume that part of that extra cost is the carbon tax, as we all have to pay it on fuel and many other things as well.
And what are some of the contributions of recreational boating and marinas to the local community in Norfolk?
It has a huge impact on tourism. People come to Port Rowan to see the harbor. They come by boat, they come by car, and it's a huge impact on the tourism for the local shops and the areas of Norfolk County.
Now, Mr. Lazell spoke a little bit about the flares issue. Do you encounter any expired flares?
Yes, there's virtually all boaters have flares on their boat, and we're all in a state where we just don't know what to do with them. We just don't have a proper disposal method at this point since it was canceled. We previously were able to take them to the power squadron, and they could dispose of them properly. And now we have no place at all to dispose of the flares.
Why are they so dangerous to dispose of yourself?
I'm not really sure, and I guess there's been no guidelines on how to dispose of them ourselves, as far as I'm aware of.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Lewis. Next, we'll go to Mr. Badaway. The floor is yours, sir. 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And first off, I want to say to Mr. Banks, congratulations and thank you. There's no question you have your hands full operating a municipal marina, having some experience in the past, my past life, past lives, I should say, owning and operating a marina in Florida from the private side, and basically as the mayor of the city of Port Colborne for 14 years, having the Sugarloaf Marina, which I'm sure you're fully aware of, in our backyard, and alongside your marina, operating really good on Lake Erie. So again, I want to congratulate you on that work that you're trying to do, because I know how difficult it is from the public side to operate a marina on unlimited dollars that your municipal council affords you. I guess my questions are going to revolve around that in terms of public versus private and the opportunities that we can actually help you from the public side bring the capital and operational expectations to you. I do know that Norfolk, for example, their marina, they have their transient slips, but they also have hydro waters. They have mechanics on site, lift services, winter storage, pump out services, fuel, and the list goes on. And I notice that you don't have that. I'm sure a lot of that has to do with capital resources needed to put that in place. I'm also aware of the federal contributions that have come about in the last few years to different municipalities. I know my area, Niagara, we've been fortunate to receive federal funding for recreational boating through tourism, the Minister of Tourism, through the Minister of Federal Development Ontario, through FedDev, as well as Transport Canada. So my question to you, and noting that you need about $21 million in capital to improve the marina, what are some specific areas that you have found that we can partner to invest? And I would say, when I say we, I don't mean just the federal government, but the provinces, the municipality together to leverage that funding through programs such as those offered through tourism, FedDev, and TC.
I'm not sure I can actually speak to that. This is a volunteer committee, and I would have no authority through the Council of Norfolk to apply or answer some of these questions directly. That's how I feel.
Thank you, Mr. Banks. So I'm not going to take the full time, because I'm not here to be political or partisan or anything like that. I'm more interested in the interests of what you need to ensure that your marina continues publicly, number one. Two, that it continues with respect to offering public access, as well as additional amenities that may attach to that public access, parks, splash pads, things like that. That I know in my community in Port Colborne with Sugarloaf Marina, we have all that, restaurants and repairs and opportunities for you to actually create revenue versus simply trying to keep afloat a marina based on the expenses you have, as well as it being really a community hub. You know, I agree, it is a tourism attractor. There's no questions that the returns on the investments, regardless of who makes those investments or who helps make those investments, are a benefit to the community. So I'm going to offer you this, as the Parliamentary Secretary for Transport, and again, once again, Mr. Banks, putting the politics and the partisanship aside, you know, again, my interest is no pun intended, but helping you keep that amenity for the community afloat. So let's touch base after this meeting, and I offer Ms. Lewis the same opportunity, because I know that you're riding, to touch base with me, and let's see what we can do to work and access some of those programs that may be available through the federal government, but also through the province and the municipality. Okay, great. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Badaway. Prochainement, nous avons Mr. Barcel-Duval. À vous la parole.
And now, Mr. Barcel-Duval, 2.5 minutes, please. Thank you, Chair. I will ask my first question to Ms. McKinnon. I've been listening to the different witnesses speak earlier, and also yourself, on how important it is to be consulted. And I thought to myself that some of the witnesses so far have said that it could be worthwhile to set up what we would call national standards for boating. And I was thinking that if I put myself in your position from your viewpoint, and I'd like to hear you on it, if we had these famous national standards, I don't know, for boats of under 50 meters or 10 kilometers per hour near the shore, or not using wakeboards at less than 200 meters from the shore and things like that, wouldn't that in fact simplify the practice for your clients that every time they go onto a lake or a river, they have to look up the regulations? And for you also, perhaps it would be easier when you have to bring in new products or associations have some kind of an activity to monitor the regulations in each municipality. If there was a kind of a basic set of rules that you can rely on, is this something that could be worthwhile for your association? I think what's worthwhile to raise is a collaborative approach. So I don't know if it's at the federal level that it should be done or if it's at the provincial level. But what I know is that at the very least, in the meantime, we can start those conversations in each province. I know that as a national association, it'll be a pleasure for us to start the process. We have a number of provincial associations, Boating Ontario, Rick, who presented earlier, and Notice Quebec, which are organizations that want to get involved and that could try to deal with the issues that bother some of the people on the lakes. So we're there to work together and look at things at the national level or provincial level. I think there's an opportunity to work together. Thank you. I'll have to interrupt you because I'm almost out of time. But Ms. Daou, I'd like to know what you think about the same question. Absolutely. I think that collaboration will lead to better use and bring more peace at the same time so that people can enjoy themselves, that all the different people can enjoy themselves. And the environment also should not be disturbed by those activities. Thank you, Mr. Basso-Duval.
A final question for Ms. Daoust. We heard earlier about the suggestion that non-regulatory consensus building approaches are the best way to approach some of the impacts like the ones you're experiencing in your watershed. I'm interested in your opinion on this and whether non-regulatory approaches are going to be sufficient to address the magnitude of impacts that you've seen, and whether you've seen other jurisdictions around North America that have succeeded with non-regulatory approaches in similar contexts.
I haven't seen in any other places in Canada because I'm here in Quebec, but you're speaking to a lawyer, so of course I'm going to tell you that it's both. It's you need the regulation, then you need to apply the regulation, but you first need people to understand the impact of what they're doing. If they understand the impact of what they're doing, and maybe they're going to do it less, maybe they're going to use other way to do things. So you have to make people understand, because people are educated and they want to know. And you also need a regulation, because otherwise you have to go on every lake, like it's been said, or in every river, and then adjust each and every time. So you have a great principle, few principle, and you need people to understand them, and especially understand why you need to apply that.
And I guess my last question would be this idea of who decides and how we value different voices depending on their connection to the place that we're talking about. In my view, if you empower municipalities, then you're giving the people who live closest to the waterway the strongest voice in regulating its use. Is that an appropriate approach in your view, or should people who travel from 4 hours away be given an equal voice in determining what regulations are put in place?
I'm going to tell you that I need the environment to have a voice. I need Hurt to have a voice. I need Les Berges, I need the bird to have a voice. So, of course, it's going to be as large as possible. But we need to know what we're talking about. We need to know the impact.
Thank you, Mr. Bachrach. Madame Daou, Ms. McKinnon. behalf of all members for your time and sharing your expertise today to this very important study. With that, colleagues, this meeting is adjourned.
you.